Hi friends. I thought I would talk today about being the lotus and the mud. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people, I think, have this idea that they're going to reach some enlightened state where they're floating above it all. But that's kind of a false idea, and if you're coming at Buddhist practice with this idea that you're going to turn into something else or hit this permanent rarefied state where nothing ever bothers you again, you're doomed to disappointment, and you're gonna chase your tail in circles, right? It's not going to be kind of long-term productive practice. And so what my teacher said pretty recently is that everybody wants to be the lotus and nobody wants to be the mud, or nobody wants to acknowledge that they're the mud. And if you don't know what I mean, in Buddhism, across the different schools and branches of Buddhism, there's often the imagery, the metaphor of the lotus and muddy water, that we need the muddy water to blossom into the lotus. Right, and so this is usually a metaphor for we have to practice right here, and difficulties are the practice, our life is the practice. But there's still maybe this sense of, but we're going to bloom above the mud and then it's going to be all good. And that ignores the fact that you don't stop being the mud when the lotus blooms. The lotus blooms with and in the mud. And so if you have this idea that you're going to reach this rarefied state where nothing ever bothers you, you're never stressed out, you never feel negative emotions, you never experience difficulties, that is a kind of delusion. And you're Zen people sometimes say putting a head on a head, right? You're putting ideas of enlightenment on top of enlightenment, and it's actually obscuring the whole thing more. And so your life, your difficulties are not an impediment to practice because they are practice. That is what you're practicing with. And this life is the life of practice, right? And so I was thinking about, I was driving to work, and I was thinking about sadness. In the last few years, I've experienced, loss, and I've, you know, cried until I almost threw up, like big loss. And when you go through big loss, it changes you on a fundamental level. And some kinds of loss we experience, there's going to be a sadness that stays with us. And so I was thinking about sadness, and I was thinking about, a lot of people think that freedom, liberation, means getting away from the sadness. You escape the sadness. You don't experience the sadness anymore. And I don't think that that's accurate. I think that freedom is freedom with the sadness, liberation with the sadness. Freedom, liberation that encompasses all beings, all feelings, all things, yourself included. And being able to be free while sadness is moving through you, while happiness is moving through you, while loneliness is moving through you, while boredom is moving through you, all those things. That's freedom. If your freedom is dependent on certain emotional states, is it really freedom? Or are you still getting yanked around the nose? If your enlightenment is contingent on, I have to feel good all the time, that's pretty limited enlightenment, isn't it? Like if your human emotions or the circumstances around you, if they dictate whether you're experiencing enlightenment or not, do you see how phrasing it that way sounds kind of backwards? And if we even subconsciously have this idea that enlightenment means, or practice is leading towards, this perfect state of no bad emotions, no bad feelings, no difficulties, no uncomfortableness, I think we're honestly causing more suffering, right? And so this idea of everybody wants to be the lotus and we don't want to be the mud, it sounds a little trite, but it's really important. When you practice, face the reality of being in this world. Even if you're an incredibly realized being, if your spouse dies, your parent dies, the world ends in nuclear blasts, species go extinct, an asteroid is flying to the, you're probably going to feel some uncomfortable feelings. And that's if your idea of enlightenment is kind of excising your humanity in that way, I don't know that that's a super healthy approach to it. And if your idea of enlightenment becomes this, it can be really easy for your practice to become a stick you beat yourself with, because you're never going to measure up to this like endlessly patient, never upset, never uncomfortable, never difficulty being that you've created in your mind. Practice becomes kind of a self-fulfilling suffering fantasy, right? Because we're never going to be that. And if you do try to like build yourself up as that, and you kind of try to create this image where you are that person or that thing, and then inevitably you fall down, the backlash of feeling like a fraud, feeling exposed, feeling disappointed in yourself, feeling like you let down other people, or the shame, right? That's a lot of suffering. And I think sometimes this is where we see people whose public persona and private persona get incredibly different, because I think it's a very unbalanced way for humans to try to act like they're always this perfect being, and that pressure has to go somewhere. And I think sometimes that's when you see like really wacky stuff going on behind the scenes in religious communities, political communities, martial arts communities, anything, especially if they have like a charismatic leader person and that person is portraying themselves as essentially perfect. I think you see a lot of what we might call like shadow behavior, right? Where stuff is coming out in the background that's quite harmful. And so the being a lotus is great. If we equate lotus to Buddha nature, you already are the lotus. But the lotus is not separate from the mud, and it needs the mud to be the lotus. And so don't fall into the trap of thinking that the goal of Buddhist practice is to never have uncomfortable feelings again, because when you do, it's going to cause maybe some harm to yourself as you have this backlash or this disappointment or self-flagellation of I'm a terrible practitioner. And also it's going to impede your progress. This life as you are is practice, and that's going to include all the things. Buddha nature includes all the things, even the things we wish it didn't include. And so I think I've talked about something a little bit like this, but I was struck by some comments at the Zendo where people were kind of, maybe subconsciously, but they're asking questions, saying things that definitely had this message of I'm going to get to a place where I never feel bad again. And my teacher's response to that was, people want to be the lotus and they don't realize that we're the mud, and our practice is the mud. And so be the lotus, be the mud, understand that your humanity or your struggles are not necessarily an impediment to practice, they're not separate from practice, and that freedom means being free with all the things, rather than freedom from certain aspects that you don't like. I hope that this maybe causes us to think about enlightenment and practice in some new ways, and I look forward to any comments or questions. Thank you.